space. Did we really ever go there?
Apollo is like the lid to Pandora's box. And there's enough evidence there to make me doubt that we ever landed men on the moon.
Everything seems to be wrong with everything regarding the record of mankind's first visits to the moon.
Houston, Apollo 11 and Saturn gave us a magnificent ride. Roger, 11, we'll pass that on, and it certainly looks like you're well on your way now.
Why is there a cover-up over what happened in space? It's very simple, really. There is supposed to be a cover-up. It's official policy.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
For 8 days in July 1969, the biggest TV audience ever watched as man conquered the final frontier. Neil Armstrong and the crew of Apollo 11 concluded America's epic struggle to get a man on the moon.
We feel that this stands as a symbol of the insatiable curiosity of all mankind to explore the unknown.
But there's another story, a story of conspiracy, cover-ups, and even culpability.
I watched the small step and the giant leap, and I thought, this is fantastic stuff. This is amazing. Man has landed on the moon. I thought, that's what I'm watching. It must be true. But did it actually happen the way we've been shown? Or is there a darker side to the Apollo mission?
According to one conspiracy, NASA couldn't actually get to the moon, so all missions were faked. Rather than climbing aboard their rockets, the astronauts were taken to a secret film studio deep in the Nevada desert. Here, the moon landings were staged and filmed before the footage was transmitted back to Houston and on to a gullible world.
Tell me if you got a picture, Houston. We got a beautiful picture, Neil.
Now, whether what we were watching were simulation exercises being transmitted as the real event, it's a possibility which needs to be examined. It needs to be examined closely because this is one of the great historical scientific achievements of any age.
In the years running up to Armstrong's lunar landing, the United States had been caught up in a bitter space race with its Cold War rival, the Soviet Union. For a long time, the Soviets looked like they were winning the race. They'd beaten the Americans with the first satellite in 1957, the first lunar probes in 1959, the first dog in space in 1960. To cap it all, in 1961, Soviet Colonel Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. According to the conspiracy, in its quest for top dog status, America needed to get a man on the moon before the Soviets, whatever the cost.
It was important diplomatically and politically and economically for the world to see American technology as superior. The Russian space efforts had threatened that. And throughout the 60s, there was a great deal of concern that Russian success in space would affect the world attitudes toward Russian technology, Russian military power, and who was going to be ahead 20, 30, 40 years in the future.
Major Gagarin.
If indeed the space flight was a symbol of the future, Russian success there could be translated very directly into Russian success on Earth and Earth diplomacy.
As if to reinforce the point, President Kennedy put his name behind the moon mission.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
So this was a prestige project. There was no project that carried a greater penalty for failure or reward for success. Everybody knew what success had to be. It had to be a picture of a man on the moon. Or it had to be what we would believe would be a picture of a man on the moon.
But could the Americans make it? Believers in the hoax theory are convinced that they couldn't. According to one former NASA contractor, there was a human cost in the rush to get to the moon.
This was brought out by the death of Grissom, Chafee, and White in 1967, when the three men burned to death in a command capsule.
NASA was indeed found culpable for the deaths of three of its best astronauts. Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White died in a flash fire during routine launch testing.
Gus Grissom was about to blow the whistle on the whole project. He found that nothing really worked right. He was very unhappy with the Apollo project. On the day that he was killed, he hung a lemon on the command capsule indicating what he thought of the whole project.
Modifications were made to the spacecraft and the moon program resumed. But there are those who believe that NASA still didn't have what it took to get men on the moon.
They could not technologically fulfill Kennedy's promise that we'd land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. So in order to retain the prestige of American industry throughout the world, they had to fake it.
I and probably 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 other journalists covered the step-by-step build-up, the construction of the facilities at the Kennedy Space Center, the development of the Apollo spacecraft in Houston, Texas, and here in California. There were so many witnesses to this event, let alone the 18 men who went to the moon. There's no way you could develop a hoax around that.
NASA's photographic records of the moon landings hold the clues to this conspiracy. TV producer David Percy has spent years examining the photographs. He's convinced he's found evidence of a hoax.
The Apollo photographs are faked. They're encoded also with what appears to be deliberate mistakes.
He claims there are continuity errors between the photographs and the TV images.
In this example, the astronaut jumps into the air and reaches the peak of his jump. His colleague takes a snap. There is a triangle of fabric that should be absolutely secure and motionless that has flapped up from the top of the portable life support system. In the TV freeze frame, we can see this triangular flap is correctly fastened and is therefore not visible. It is not flapped up.
But is this evidence that the moon landing was filmed in a studio?
Now, looking at this picture, the rock over to the left of the screen has the letter C marked on it. Why should there be a letter of the English alphabet stamped onto a rock on the moon's surface? Surely we are looking at the deliberate planting of props in a pre-designated position in the foreground of a photographic film set.
It is said that for every hour spent in space, 5 hours were spent rehearsing on Earth. Of course they did that, and that was no secret. It was no secret that photographs and films were taken of models of the lunar surface. It worked as a simulation. Nobody else had been there. Nobody knew the difference.
Columbia, this is Houston, AOS, over.
Houston, Columbia,
It's worth noting that during the Apollo 11 mission, NASA omitted to get any photographs of Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. All the shots are of co-pilot Buzz Aldrin. Would NASA have made such a PR blunder if everything had been staged in a studio?
The search for conspiracies is the search for explanations. And in many cases, in many mysteries, a conspiracy is a very plausible first hypothesis. You then have to look beyond that and find out what really happened and research, talk to people, talk to technology, see what was physically possible.
In 1991, a cable TV station manager in Vancouver intercepted a series of transmissions beamed back to Earth from the orbiting space shuttle. The tapes have since been examined by British UFO chasers Graham Birdsall and Russell Callaghan. They believe this is proof that astronauts have seen UFOs.
Here you had an object just below the Earth horizon travelling along when suddenly there's a flash to port or the left-hand side of the shuttle. The object makes an incredible right angle manoeuvre, goes back more or less from whence it came, and two missile-type streaks are seen left and right. We can see patently clear on the footage that it was an intelligently controlled spacecraft.
But what we must remember, Graham, as well, is that these shots they're there. These are framed shots. Somebody's watching this particular area of space, and as you watch what happens, you get the feel that whatever's happening is being expected.
But there's nothing new in astronauts seeing UFOs outside their spacecraft. As far back as 1962, John Glenn, America's first man in Earth orbit, reported seeing green fireflies flying outside his space capsule. More recently, shuttle astronauts have remarked that these anomalies are now a regular occurrence. With so many sightings, there must be a rational explanation.
The cameras outside the shuttle are pointed out toward the dark Earth, looking for lightning bursts. On these flights, there's special features about the visual environment around the shuttles that can explain what you're really seeing. If the shuttle was sitting like this with its belly toward the sun, and pieces of debris or ice that would be in here in the shuttle shadow as they drift out get sunlit. They're sitting here in the shadow, they drift, watch my fingers, drift out and suddenly are in the sunlight, and they appear in the middle of the camera's view. This can be a very impressive looking apparition if you haven't seen it before.
It's not the sort of imagery that NASA prefers to debate or talk about in any great length at all, period.
They're drawn into it at all.
They will not talk about it.
The irony here is that those who accuse NASA of a cover-up are themselves covering up facts to make their story look more real.
Yet NASA's own planetary photographs have led some to wonder whether there is life in space. In photographs widely available to the public, geologists have found rock formations on the surface of the moon that some believe to be artificial.
I might mention first of all that so far I have found 44 sites on the moon that I suspect or have confirmed anomalies.
Amateur geologist Steve Troy has spent the last 6 years looking at NASA's moon photographs. During his extensive research, he claims to have found evidence of an alien base lying deep inside a lunar crater.
There's all the geology that you would see around an impact crater that size. But you also see orthogonal, geometric, buttressed lunar ruins around the flank of the crater. One particular object is a structure called the rampart, which is about 5 miles long.
In addition to this 8-sided structure, Troy claims to have found the remains of glass domes, relics of a larger settlement.
The things that we're seeing on the moon are, remnants of something that used to be much, much bigger. I believe it's artificial. I don't believe it's natural.
So, did the astronauts accidentally stumble across moon bases, structures built by aliens? Astronomer Patrick Moore, who was part of the team that originally mapped the moon back in the 1960s, thinks that all this talk of aliens and moon bases may be a little far-fetched.
One thing you've got to remember, when you hear conspiracy theory, that is the hallmark of the crackpot. I've been looking at the moon all my life, through some of the world's best telescopes with my moon mapping days, and since, of course, and now with the space pictures. We know every facet of the moon, maps of the entire surface, craters, mountains, ridges, valleys, and nothing we can't explain.
Okay, Houston, the moon is essentially gray. No color. Looks like plaster of Paris. Or sort of a grayish beach.
Still, there are question marks. Ken Johnson worked as head of NASA's Data and Photo Control Department. It was his responsibility to check films that came back from the moon. While working in the lab, he came across technicians who, he says, were deliberately altering lunar photographs.
There were a group of 3 people sitting around a light table about the size of a card table. And there were 2 men and one lady. When I noticed that they had film and negatives out on the light table, and they had very fine little paintbrushes, and they were painting blacking out parts of the negatives. And I asked them, I said, well, what are you folks doing? And one of the gentlemen quipped very quickly, he says, we're professional strippers. The lady kind of laughed, and she said, well, actually, what we are doing is we are stripping by painting along the surface of the horizon to paint out any stars so it won't be confusing.
Although this form of retouching is commonplace in photo labs, Ken Johnston believes the NASA technicians were removing any evidence of alien bases. On another occasion, the same form of retouching was carried out on a roll of film.
During the showing of that particular reel, we came up on the crater. You could see a cluster of about 5 lights. Today I'd probably refer to them as domes, 5 dome clusters of lights.
Such an amazing discovery stuck in his mind, but not as much as what happened the next day when he showed the film to other scientists.
The film goes right past the crater. There's no evidence of any lights or any steam, nothing at all.
So it seems, someone was trying to hide the truth about what was on the moon.
I've heard it said that NASA have kept back images of artifacts. Well, I've never heard that rubbish in my life. Why should they do that to start with? Certainly you couldn't do it, well, because our pictures are far too detailed. And as I say, there are some people who will try and make something out of nothing. And that's what these people do, I fear. But they say it's quite harmless.
All this talk of bases on the moon was nothing compared to what they found on Mars. In 1976, NASA's Viking 1 probe sent back pictures from Mars that added new weight to the theory of life elsewhere in the galaxy. One set of images in particular attracted scientists' attention. Deep in the Cydonia region in Mars's northern hemisphere, the Viking probe photographed what appeared to be an image of a human face. Scientists still debate about what was found on Mars, but Mark Colotto, an imaging analyst for the US government, is under no illusions.
When I first looked at the picture, was very clearly a humanoid face. But what was more striking to me was the context. There were these what appeared to be very geometrical, angular-looking objects nearby.
In addition to the face, Mark Colotto has identified on the Mars photographs what he says are pyramids, ramparts, and even a complex known as the City.
We're talking about structures that are millions, perhaps 500 million years old, not thousands of years old.
To further his argument that these aren't simply tricks of the light or optical illusions, Carlotto has further enhanced the images using computer technology.
What I've done that I think has been different from what other people have done is to try to understand these objects, in particular the face, in 3 dimensions. In order to do this, I've had to reconstruct the shape of it using computer vision techniques. What if the sun was in a different position in the sky? What if we were looking at the object from a different vantage point? I proved very conclusively that over a wide range of viewing conditions, it still looked like a face.
NASA remains unconvinced of his findings. To back this up, the Global Surveyor mission in 1997 sent back greatly enhanced images of the Martian surface. These showed the face to be nothing more than a pile of rocks. A conclusion many geologists seem happy to agree with.
One of the things that many scientists, myself included, have done is looked at these images of the face on Cydonia, the images taken by Viking, and thought, crumbs, yes, it does look very much like a face. But then when the next set of images come of exactly the same region, but the sun happens to be at a different angle, you can see quite clearly from those images that it's not a face.
No one has been able to fault the methodology. In fact, the methods used have been published by myself and by others, and there's no question about their validity. The only question is the interpretation.
I believe that they can be related to what's on the moon. Maybe it was a message to try to communicate something to us, to tell us of their technology, to tell us of their place in the universe, to tell us where we are with ours.
It is a characteristic of the human mind to try to impose patterns on what appear to be random events. There are people who look at this little mountain on Mars, and in their imagination, they're imposing the filter of human imagination on very ordinary, explainable phenomenon.
So far, the only tangible evidence of life on Mars was found in a meteorite recovered from Antarctica in 1996. Intelligent life? Not quite.
Things that I have studied in Martian meteorites are possibly very, very primitive forms of life. Bacteria, fossilized bacteria. Any sort of civilization that is going to build monuments on the surface of Mars is going to have to be hugely more advanced than some primitive microorganism.
Mars has become a great subject of fascination and focus of energies because the more we learn about it, the more likely it is that there are signs of life, if not existing life, on that planet. And that is one of the key questions that we want to ask to the universe is, where else is there life? Are we unique? How else could life form? Or are they even related?
Soon after its formation in 1957, NASA commissioned a report to consider the possible consequences of the discovery of life in outer space. It concluded that any such discovery should be kept from the public for fear of mass panic. Conspiracy theorists say this is proof that we were never going to be told the truth about the exploration of space.
It could have been decided that it was far safer to adopt the surrogate program and produce to the world a representation of this great achievement of mankind.
When you look at the evidence, when you look at what we've discovered, and we look at the fact that it's been withheld, you have to come to the conclusion that there has to be some group that is steering the evidence release to the public.
What we see is a story of management, space management, for public consumption. And that's what's happened. So we're given spoon-fed information that is pre-digested, so we don't choke on it.
But in the future,
especially as space travel becomes a reality for more of us? Can the truth about what is out there always be kept from us?